sheesh, this is already going downhill. It's Jeremy's fault. That's right. I was talking to Jeremy the other day, as a matter of fact, and he's like, oh man, it looks like it's going to rain. And I already prepared a message. And I was like, well, what we can do is why don't we both preach and then we'll vote on see which one people like the best. So it's like, yeah, the groaning is not, they just no, we're not sitting through two sermons. So, and then I thought, what if it's like dueling pianos? You ever been to one of those piano bars? That would be fun. Point, counterpoint, and anyway.
2 minutes or 1 minute.
Yeah, that seems like it just elongate the morning. So we're not going to do that. So you're stuck with me today. We are in the season of Advent. We are talking about, and I know both churches, so it's nice that we're doing this. We've kind of collaborated on this almost as if we planned it. And we're looking at the incarnation of Jesus and using that as a model for us of what it means to be missional. And so a couple weeks ago, we looked at the first step of that is to leave. That we leave our homes, our comfort zones, our Christian bubbles to go out into the world to be a part of the world. And then when we leave, we live among people. We get to know our neighbors. We show an interest in others. And today is the third step, which is listening. That we leave, we go out, we live among, but then we have to listen to those around us. And so turn with me to Mark chapter 10. And in this story, you'll see how Jesus listens to a man called blind Bartimaeus. And we're picking up at verse 46. Then they came to Jericho, as Jesus and his disciples together with a large crowd were leaving the city. A blind man, Bartimaeus, that is the son of Timaeus, was sitting on the roadside begging. When he heard that it was Jesus of Nazareth, he began to shout, Jesus, son of David, have mercy on me. Many rebuked him and told him to be quiet, but he shouted all the more, Son of David, have mercy on me. Jesus stopped and said, call him. So they called to the blind man, cheer up, on your feet, he's calling you. Throwing his cloak aside, he jumped to his feet and came to Jesus. What do you want me to do for you? Jesus asked him. The blind man said, Rabbi, I want to see. Go, said Jesus, your faith has healed you. Immediately he received his sight and followed Jesus along the road. Again, this is an interesting story because partly of where it takes place. This is literally one of the last stories we hear of Jesus before he goes into Jerusalem for essentially his death. So this is, again, likely that weekend leading into Holy Week. And he's passing through a city called Jericho, which for pilgrims coming from Galilee, the Jews that would be coming from the north, they would travel around Samaria typically. They'd cross the Jordan, head south and then cross the Jordan again. And where they cross the Jordan is Jericho, the city of Jericho, really where the first Israelites conquered and where they began the conquest of the land. And then Jericho would lead a steep incline to Jerusalem. And so Bartimaeus places himself on this road because he knows this is where the action is, right? This is where the people are. So he's very strategic. He's there in order to receive alms and goodwill from people. That's really his only means of survival. As a blind man, he can't work, he can't support himself. He relies on the goodwill of others. And so he's along this road begging, and we don't know exactly how he knows Jesus. I'm imagining, and this is I'm making this up, all right? So don't build your whole theology around this. But I'm imagining because he is blind, he's more in tune with what people are saying. And this is a part of what we're going to talk about today with listening, is that it's really the sense that he must rely on the most now. Because he can't see what's going on. He hears the commotion. He hears the crowd. He hears what they're talking about, that this Jesus, and there's high, what's called messianic fervor, which is the group of people, these Israelites, are thinking Jesus is this conquering Messiah who's going to come to Jerusalem to kick out Rome and to establish David's throne again. And we see that even with Bartimaeus here, right? Because he calls Jesus, the only time in Mark this title is used of him, he calls him Son of David, acknowledging that Jesus is from the lineage of David and that, but it's more about who Jesus is in terms of what he's going to do. He's going to overthrow, he's going to establish this kingdom of David again. This, again, more of a political kingdom, not a salvific kingdom. And so Bartimaeus is in tune with what's going on, and he cries out to Jesus. He doesn't know where Jesus is. He's just kind of following the crowd in what's going on. He just starts crying out, screaming, Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me, over and over. And the crowds are bothered by this, right? The crowds are always in this place, by the way. The followers of Jesus included are often the ones who are trying to kind of keep everybody else quiet, keep other people away from Jesus. There's sort of an irony in that, isn't that? Like, aren't we supposed to be the ones pointing people to Jesus? And the disciples were the ones keeping the kids from Jesus. And the crowds are the ones keeping Bartimaeus from Jesus. Why? It's probably because they look at Jesus and they go, man, this guy's important. He's special. He can't be bothered with somebody like you. You're an outcast. You're a nobody. You have no status. You have no importance. And so they try to they think they're doing Jesus a favor. Like, we're keeping the riffraff away from you. And that's not what Jesus himself, does. It's not how he treats people. The crowds tell him to be quiet, but Bartimaeus calls all the more. And what does Jesus do? He stops and he calls for him. And that's one of the points I want us to see right from the beginning, that no one is too insignificant for Jesus. There is no one who's insignificant. There's no one who doesn't have worth and have value. And that's super important for us, especially as we seek to be missional people leading missional lives, that we have to see value in other people. Otherwise, it's too easy just to cast them aside, to say there is no hope for them. So we must see value in other people just as Jesus does. Jesus calls him, and then he asks the most illogical question in all of the Bible, right? What do you want me to do for you? Like, I'm imagining, it's probably a good thing I wasn't a part of, the Bible. Because if I was Bartimaeus, I don't know what I would have said. Probably nothing positive. Maybe I would say something snarky like, who's really the blind one here? Do you not see that I can't see? What's going on here? Of course I want. But there's something in that question, right? Why does Jesus ask this question? Partly, I think it's because he wants Bartimaeus to truly think about and reflect upon what his need really is. Is his need truly just to restore sight, or is there something more? And Bartimaeus' response shows his faith that Jesus is powerful enough to deliver his sight, but I think it also demonstrates his faith that Jesus is more than just a miracle worker, that Jesus has more to offer Bartimaeus. But what I want us to see most importantly here is that Jesus is interested in the person of Bartimaeus. He's paying attention to the human being that's in front of him. And this is not something, again, if Jesus easily could have just, waved his hand, said a word, he could have healed Bartimaeus and still not been interrupted, right? But Jesus doesn't do that. He actually stops. He's on his mission, and he stops to pay attention to Bartimaeus and engage with him, to engage the conversation and to listen to Bartimaeus and truly listen to his needs. And by the way, we see this tons of places in the Gospels. We see it all over Jesus' ministry. We see it with the woman with the incessant bleeding, the woman that had the hemorrhage. Jesus was on a mission to go to this very important person's house, Jairus, who was a synagogue leader and well-respected in the community. And his daughter was sick, and he needed to get there to try to heal them. So this crowd is following Jesus, and he has to be urgent and get there. It's important. And meanwhile, this woman who had this hemorrhage for years comes up behind and touches his cloak. And in doing so, she's healed. And what does Jesus do? If you know the story, he stops. He's on this urgent mission. This girl is sick, and he needs to get there to heal her. But he stops and pays attention and draws out this woman so that she knows that she's valuable, that she's worthy as well. As a matter of fact, again, we see it throughout tons of places. The healing of the paralytic man at the pool. Jesus doesn't just heal him. He engages him. He says things, do you want to get well? What might seem like an obvious question, it's a way, again, of helping the person draw into a relationship with Jesus. The woman caught in adultery. This is another way. And again, here's the irony of this one. In Jesus listening to her, he doesn't say a word. Doesn't even speak to her. She's brought before him and accused of adultery, and the Pharisees are trying to trap Jesus, and they ask him, and our law says that she's supposed to be stoned to death. What do you say? And what does Jesus do? He stoops down and writes on the ground. says nothing. It's like, what? It's because he's taking the attention off of her. He's drawing the attention to himself. He eventually does answer the question by saying, whoever's guilty or whoever's not guilty, cast the first stone. And they all walk away. And that's the point that he talks to the woman. And again, goes back to drawing in the sand. And at that point, he looks up and kind of says, where is everybody? They all left. And he says, okay, if they don't condemn you, neither do I. Jesus, again, he's available to people. He's accessible to people. He's interested in the person. The rich young ruler comes to him. And we say, the Gospels tell us, Jesus looked at him and loved him. Even he saw this earnestness in this man, but also knowing that he had great wealth. He denied Jesus, but that doesn't change the fact that Jesus looked at him. He saw him. He paid attention to him. The Samaritan woman at the well. Another example, Jesus easily could have identified, condemned her, could have preached at her, done all sorts of things. And what does he do? He asks for a drink. He says, will you give me something to drink? And then he engages her, invites her into a conversation, into a relationship, instead of just jumping immediately into her problem. Zacchaeus the same way. He invites himself over to his house. And there's probably a little sidebar for us. Jeremy and I talk about this a lot. That one of the ways that we can engage people and build relationships is not just by serving them, but it's by asking them to help us, to lend a hand. And there's a genius in that in two ways. Number one, it almost obligates you back to them, right? So if it's one of those things where, you're moving heavy furniture and, hey, could you give me a hand with this? And it might be a perfect stranger, a neighbor that you're building a relationship with. Would you mind helping me out? Most of the time, people are happy to do it. And then you have that opportunity to thank them and then re-engage them by, when you walk over, to give them a plate of cookies and a thank you note. You now have 2 points of contact with them. So it's a strategy that Jesus employed by, again, just paying attention to the people that were around him. These are all different ways that Jesus listened to people. And it's important that we define listening here, because listening is not just about hearing. It's not just engaging our sense of hearing. It entails hearing, but it's also watching and sensitively responding to the spoken and unspoken needs of others that demonstrate sincere interest. It's on your notes there, but I'll say it again. Listening entails hearing, watching, and sensitively responding to the spoken and unspoken needs of others that demonstrate sincere interest. It's hearing, watching, responding. Those are the verbs that we use. But there's also, what does it require? It requires a heart of humility, of sensitivity, sincerity, empathy. I know what those words mean. I just don't have any of that, right? This is my mom agrees. This is what makes hearing so hard. It's what makes listening to people so hard. You have to have that posture of sincerity and empathy and sensitivity to them and be interested in them, right? It's why it's so much harder than it appears. We're going to watch a little video that demonstrates this. I think you'll get a kick out of this one.
It's right up on me, and I can just feel it, like literally feel it in my head, and it's relentless, and I don't know if it's going to stop. I mean, that's the thing that scares me the most, is that I don't know if it's ever going to stop.
Yeah. Well, you do have a nail in your head.
It is not about the nail.
Are you sure? Because, I'll bet if we got that out of there...
Stop trying to fix it.
No, I'm not trying to fix it. I'm just pointing out that maybe the nail is causing...
You always do this. You always try to fix things when what I really need is for you to just listen.
See, I don't think that is what you need. I think what you need is to get the nail
See, you're
out.
not even listening now.
Okay, fine. I will listen. Fine.
It's just... Sometimes it's like there's this achy... I don't know what it is. And I'm not sleeping very well at all. And all my sweaters are snagged. All of them.
That sounds really hard.
It is. Thank you. No.
Come on. If you would just
Don't.
Try to see things my way.
That is one of my favorite movies of all time. And it's one of the positive things that came out of the internet, by the way. Because it works on so many levels, right? I mean, it's about relationships, but again, it really boils down to listening. And I think what we see here in the video, we can notice a contrast between this man and Jesus. Because when Jesus encounters blind Bartimaeus, he asks him the question, what is it you want me to do for you? He doesn't make assumptions. We'll talk about that in a minute. Even when the need was obvious, like the nail in the head, the need was obvious. But what did the person want beyond being fixed? She just wanted to be heard. Just listen and hear me. That sounds really hard. I mean, it cracks me up. I'm sorry. It's so funny. But we're like that man. I think as Christians, sometimes we see other people struggling or going through an issue or a problem. We see a need around us, and we know the answer. We know the solution. We know how to fix it. And so we kind of step in and say, this is what they need. And sometimes we might make it worse because we make that assumption. Jesus doesn't do that. We see the problem. We have a solution. Jesus sees a problem, and he engages the person. So this is one of the issues that we find in our society today, is it not? That when we feel like we have an answer and we give it to somebody, we have a solution, we offer it, and people don't listen, what do? We get mad. We yell louder. That's what I do, right? You're not listening to me, so I'm going to yell louder. And then everybody's just yelling because everyone wants to talk. Everyone wants to offer the solution. No one wants to listen. So this is what we see online. So what we see in politics and the 24-hour news cycles and marriages, everywhere. It's like everyone has a platform, and social media has given people platforms to talk, to broadcast, to tell you my opinion on something, the way something should be. And yet, nobody wants to listen to other people. We just want to keep talking and yelling. Again, if we want to build relationships with people, if we want to have an impact like Jesus had, it's going to begin with listening, not necessarily talking. It's going to be paying attention to their spoken and unspoken desires and needs, and not just jumping to conclusions or assumptions about what we think they need. That's what Jesus did. So the question for us is, how do we do this? Well, look at your notes. Number 1, stop talking. Step 1 to listening is to stop talking. That's hard, but there's an old adage about this, right? You've been given 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason, right? That's been around for thousands of years because it's true. But yet again, that's very countercultural these days. And it's actually one of the ways I think as Christians we can separate. We can be different from the world. We can show a different pathway by being open to listening to other people. This is what Jesus did with the woman caught in adultery. He didn't even talk. He just was quiet. He allowed for that so that he can pay attention to the needs of someone else. Number 2, we want to stop making assumptions. Again, just like he did with Bartimaeus, just like he did with the beggar at the pool of Bethsaida. He doesn't make assumptions about what people need. He engages them in the conversation and draws them out, asking them what it is that they want. What is it that they need? This can be hard for us, especially when somebody's going through a crisis or a difficult time. A friend of mine lost a family member this summer, and it's a horribly difficult time. And I remember calling them after church one day on my way home and wanted to just swing by, see what they needed. And I called and said, what do you need? Do you need food? I'll pick up lunch for you. And they're like, oh, please, God, no more food. Like, we don't even have the space in our freezer for this anymore. Everything's packed because people are so generous with that part of things. She goes, no, we don't really need anything. And I said, are you sure? Is there anything you can think of? She's like, honestly, I need someone to clean my bathrooms because I got all these people coming over. I got relatives coming into town tomorrow. I can't do this. I'm not in a place, and they need to be cleaned. Yeah, that's easy. Like, really? Yeah, we could take care of that. I mean, I was offering to do it, and it turns out somebody else who was there heard, and they jumped on it and got it taken care of. I mean, it's just asking the question, what is it that you need? How can I help you right now? And sometimes, when people are in a dark place, a hard place, they may not be in a position to tell you exactly. So sometimes offering, would it be helpful? Instead of just saying, I'm going to bring over food, would it be helpful if I brought something over? Have you eaten? Can I offer you that? There's lots of different ways, but again, we don't make assumptions, we ask them. In a similar way, it's closely related. Stop jumping to solutions. Again, like the man in the video. It's an easy solution. It's right there. You have this nail. I think if we took it out, it's probably gonna fix things, right? And she's like, it's not about the nail. No, I think it is. And it's hard, again, especially for fixers. We want to, we have the solution. Let's do it. But we can't just jump to solutions. We don't just give advice. This is what Jesus did with the Samaritan woman. Again, he doesn't jump to the solutions of how to fix her life. He invites her into the conversation. We ask them, maybe help them find the solution. We don't tell them what they should be doing. We don't give unsolicited advice. And we certainly don't tell people how they should feel about something. Instead, we need to do things like give our full attention to people. This is what Jesus did in looking at the man and loving him, or stopping and calling for Bartimaeus. Jesus wasn't just healing him on the way. He stopped and paid attention. He looked at him. He listened to him. He gave him the attention. It's one of the greatest gifts we can give to people. It's part of our hospitality, is that we can give people our attention. And this is hard because we're pulled in different directions. As we were getting ready for service, I was running a little bit late, and George was trying to tell me something, and I'm over here doing stuff. I'm not paying attention at all. Sorry, George. I already apologized to him. But I was like, I'm sorry, I'm distracted right now. I've got to get this done, so I can't give you my attention. Just give me a minute. We have to give people our attention, but think about our world today with all these phones. Jeremy's on his phone right now. It's just like, I saw you doing this, so I thought you were on your phone. I like how you immediately did the Polish salute. That was good. I don't think we're supposed to say that anymore. Anyway, sorry, I'm not PC. I'm in trouble, I know that. But, we get on our phones, and it's like we're talking to somebody, and we're scrolling through our phones. We get a beep and a message, and we want to see what's going on, and we don't want to be left out. And it's hard. Even having your phone face down on the table. I was in a meeting with somebody the other day, and I realized that's what happened, and my phone's buzzing, and, he's kind of looking down at the phone, and I'm trying to ignore it, but I realized just having it out was enough to show him that, it's like, you're not that important to me, that I can't put my phone away. Maybe it's even in how we act, we're fidgety or we're watching the game. I know every time, like when my kids come home and I've got the TV on or the game on or something, my wife says, pause the TV. Like, you need to give your attention to your children at this point. Like, I know, but the Rams are driving, but that's part of it. It's like we have to set aside and give people our attention. Fifth, we show genuine interest in the other person. Just as Jesus did with the rich young ruler, showing that interest, looking at him, loving him, seeing him for his desires and his needs. I hate to do this, but I have to. I have to give Jeremy some credit on this one. It's actually in my notes before I knew Jeremy was going to be here today. So I was going to tell my people, don't tell Jeremy this, right? But it's true. Jeremy's really good at this. It might be faking interest. I don't know. But he doesn't. He shows genuine interest in people. He pays attention. He does. Every one of us can attest to that. We meet every Tuesday, and usually before he ever gets to my office, he's talking with Carol. And so he walks in the other day, and he's, hey, Carol, how's the flooring project going? What's going on with that? And I'm like, I totally forgot about that. I work with Carol like every day. I see her all the time. It's like, I'm a horrible person, which is probably true. But, that's why Jeremy's around. He's like the yin and yang thing. But, being curious about people, asking them questions about themselves, find out what interests and excites them. One of the worst things you can do, with communication and listening is trying to communicate what interests you to the other person, right? If you show interest in them, then they're going to feel much better about the conversation and about the relationship and who you are. So it's asking good questions and finding interest. And like, oh, you have a bottle cap collection? That's really cool. Tell me about that. What got you started on that? Instead of going, that's weird. You're a weirdo. I don't want to hang out with you anymore. Right? There's a different way. We show an interest. We're curious. Ask questions. Seek common ground. Affirm them. Encourage them. And this is where Jeremy's not so good. Accept long pauses and silence sometimes, okay? That's the other part, is that we have to be willing to give space for people to express what their desires are, or maybe their needs or their feelings. Lastly, and maybe more importantly, we look for the why behind the what. Look for the why behind the what. What I mean by that is that we want to look for not just the facts and the details of what they're sharing, but ask ourselves, why are they sharing this with me? What is it that is driving this? If somebody's talking about, how they lost their job, and, it's asking them questions about, oh, what did you do? Did you do something to get fired? Or tell me about your boss. What kind of jerk is he? Whatever it might be. It's not the details that matter. It's not the facts of what matters, the what. What matters is the why. Why are they telling you this? What seems to be bothering them? What's their emotion? Even asking them, how are you feeling about this? It's a great way to communicate, again, your care and your interest in them, is to get behind just the facts and the details, the cerebral information, into the emotional. This is what Jesus does with Bartimaeus. He asks them, and what does Bartimaeus say? I want to see. And we kind of look at that and say, well, that means that Bartimaeus does not want to be blind anymore. And that's part of it. But when Bartimaeus says, I want to see, there's a spiritual reality to that as well. It's not that he just wants to see. He's saying, I want to see so that I can see what you're doing, that I can be a part of what you're doing, that I can follow you and witness this great event in our history. I mean, even though he was wrong about who Jesus was as this political military leader, he still knew he wanted to be a part of it. That was part of his desire to see, and that's what Jesus is able to get to in asking him the question. So we ask the same question. What is it that they want to tell us? Why are they telling us this? Again, this is hard. This is not natural for us. We're not taught this stuff, right? We have things like speech and debate club. What are those clubs designed to do? To win the argument, to talk over somebody, to beat them, right? When you take a communications class in college, what's the communication? You getting your point across in a clear and concise manner. Or seminary, homiletics, right? It's about what you do up here so that people out there can hear you and they follow and understand you. I didn't take that class. But one of the classes, I read about this Catholic priest that the huge cathedral in like New Mexico, thousands and thousands of people come through every day for confession. They have like 6 priests working 12-hour shifts, taking confessions. And he says, we had no training on confessions, taking confessions. It's like we had very little. And that's where most of their job, it's listening. We're not trained how to listen. I mean, maybe you get some active listening training at work and stuff, and it's usually things like, look them in the eye and repeat back what they just told you. And it just becomes this parroting. And that's not how people feel heard. It's when you're able to clearly respond, articulate what they're saying and ask them questions and then reflect back, but respond in an appropriate way. It takes practice. So when you leave a conversation, ask yourself, what did I just learn about this person? What did I learn about them? What was most concerning to the person today? And how did that person feel about what we were talking about? If you ask yourselves those questions, what did I learn? What is most concerning to them? And how did they feel? It helps you pay attention to the conversations you're having. And if you can't answer those questions, or at least one of those questions, it probably means you weren't really listening. So it's going to take practice. We do it, and practice with the people around you. Practice with your friends, practice with your spouse, your kids, whoever it might be. A former FBI lead hostage negotiator, which I think that's a fun job, right? Lead hostage negotiator for the FBI. His name is Gary Nosner. He says, I think a good listener is someone who is open to hearing someone else's experiences and ideas, and acknowledges their point of view. A good listener is someone who is open to hearing someone else's experiences and ideas and acknowledges their point of view. He doesn't say you have to agree with them. It's just that you're open. You invite them into the conversation, and then you allow them to share what's valuable to them and what they care about. And you're open to their experiences and ideas, and you acknowledge them as theirs. You don't, again, have to agree with them, but you acknowledge that they have them. It's not just hearing what they say, but how they say it, paying attention to not just what they're telling you, how they're telling you, the context, what they're doing while they're saying it. All these things are parts of the way, are ways that we can actively listen to other people. When we do this, again, with practice, deliberation, we'll begin to really open up our world. We'll gain wisdom. There's so much we can learn from other people. We heard this last week in our video when N.T. Wright was talking about this. You're never bored because people are fascinating. People have fascinating stories to tell. I remember being at a breakfast with, we did a men's breakfast at my other church years ago, or we'd have a Bible study, then we'd go out to breakfast. And I was talking with this one old guy in the church, and knew of him, didn't really know him very well. We start talking. This dude was fascinating. He played pro football for the Lions back in the 30s when it was like leather helmets, right? He built his own airplane and flew it and crashed it. I mean, this is like in a 5-minute conversation. I'm like, what the heck? This is before the Dos Equis commercials, right? The most interesting man in the world. But when those commercials came on, I'm like, no, that dude is the most interesting man in the world. Like, he's got a story. And it's like, he was right there the whole time. All it took was like asking the right question instead of, again, trying to talk about myself for once, be interested in somebody else. But when we do that, we gain the insight of wisdom. But we also, more importantly, gain meaningful relationships. Because when people feel heard, right, then they feel like they're valued. It means that they're important, that what they value is important. And again, somebody's bottle cap collection might mean nothing to you, but if it's a value to them and you can show interest, it shows that you're interested and you value them. I have a good friend of mine who can talk more than anyone else I've ever known, including Jeremy. I mean, not even close. His name's Andy. He's probably watching right now. He can talk for 30 to 45 minutes or longer without stopping, without you interrupting, saying anything. He just has this ability to talk. He's also one of the greatest listeners I know. He remembers things and details and facts and everything about you and your family. He asks the question after his 45 minutes. He'll ask a question and you can say one thing and he retains it. Years ago, probably 12 years ago, he was taking my brother and I and my nephew to the airport. And he doesn't just come to show up and chauffeur us. He brings like snacks. He's got a cheese platter and a meat platter, and he's got drinks in the cooler, and he's got this spread in his trunk that he's got, ready for us to make our ride more enjoyable. And he had this cheese platter, and he's talking to my brother. My brother goes, "Oh, this is good." And I think he said something like, "Do you have any sharp cheese? Do you have any sharp cheddar cheese?" And Andy's kind of laughed like that. He's got all his whole cheese thing, but he doesn't have sharp cheddar, and kind of just becomes this throwaway comment. Well, like 2 or 3 years later, I'm going down to visit my brother, and he gives me this platter of sharp cheddar cheese. He's like, "Take this to your brother." And I did. And took it down there, and I said, "This is from Andy." And he's like, "Okay, why is he giving me this cheese platter?" I said, "Do you remember when he took us to the airport a couple years ago?" "Yeah, I remember that spread that he gave." "Yeah." I said, "He remembered. You like sharp cheddar cheese." He's like, "No way." I was like, "Yeah, that's who he is." A person like that endears you to them, right? Now, he was a great salesman, and you can believe that because he can remember those things. It's Jeremy again coming into Carol. "How's the flooring project going?" It's showing that you're paying attention to them, so you endear yourself to them. Notice, by the way, coming back to Bartimaeus, Jesus never invites Bartimaeus to follow him. Do you notice that? When Jesus calls other disciples, he's like, "Follow me, leave everything." What does he do for Bartimaeus? He notices him. He pays attention to him. He shows an interest in him. He listens to him. He responds to him with grace. And by doing that, what does Bartimaeus do? He follows. Maybe we've gotten it wrong all these years because we've been focusing on the, beating people over the head with it, or saying, "You need to follow Jesus, you need to do this, you need to do this." Jesus, maybe we just follow Jesus' pattern. I mean, could it be that simple? Just to say, notice people, listen, pay attention to them, show an interest, listen to them, respond in grace. Maybe that's all it is. Probably won't know until we try, right? Let's pray. Lord Jesus, again, we thank you for your listening to us. You're listening to our need, that even before you came down, you heard our cry, you heard our need. You saw and you did something about it. And so we thank you for that, Lord, that you are a God who notices, you are a God who pays attention to us, who shows an interest in us, or personal to us, that you listen to us and that you respond in your grace. And so let us use that as an example as well, Lord, as we seek to be missional people and to go out into the world and reflect you. Let us do the things that you did in listening to others well, so that we can point them to you as their true need, the thing that is behind all goodness in their life. And so equip us through the power of your Holy Spirit. We pray all this in Jesus' name. Amen.